dedicated, determined, dependable. Live in HD.
Thanks for joining us. I'm Elisa Streeter.
On air and online.
News 10 starts now.
Good evening, everybody. I'm John McLaughlin.
And I'm Tracy.
This is 10 Eyewitness News at 6 o'clock.
TV 10 Action News with Dick Wood and Marcy Elliott.
Coming up next on
TV 10 Action News. Dick Williams, Channel 10 News.
This is Mark Edwards reporting for WTEN News.
Hello, and thank you so much for joining us in our 70th anniversary celebration of WTEN. I'm Lydia Colbeda.
And I'm John Gray. What started as a hope and a prayer turned into one of the most successful media companies in the whole world.
Tonight, we look back at the people and the events who made it all happen. And we do it by hearing from the people who were there.
And it resonates as much today as it did as the story was first told 43 years ago.
Remember, it's been more than a quarter of a century since these people got capital cities started in a convent in Troy, New York. Ideas then came from the innovators in a young industry. The convent is gone without a trace. But we visited the area where it used to stand with two of the people who were there at the beginning, and they remember.
Seems strange to be walking down this road, Ralph.
Boy, Gene, it sure does. When I figure back in 1953, 27 years ago, you know, this was a home to us. This was the beginning of a brand new industry.
That young industry was television, and it was spreading in every neighborhood and on every street across the country.
I'm Mary Caroline Powers, and I worked at Channel 10 as an anchorwoman, a reporter, and a producer from the mid-70s through the late 80s. There was one person on our block who worked for the General Electric Credit Union. So he had arrived one day with this tiny little thing. It was about this big, and we turned it on.
Millions of Americans were turning their televisions on. In 1950, 5 million TV sets were sold. That compares to just 7,000 4 years earlier.
Well, my name is Phil Buth, and I hope somebody will recognize me, maybe, but I was a veteran of Channel 10 from about 70 years ago. I was fortunate enough to be the first person hired. In the case of the Tri-Cities, WRGB, the General Electric station, was dominant, and they were a VHF, that's very high frequency.
Television went on like at 4:45 with like a little 15-minute show with puppets. And then at 5 o'clock to 5:15, there'd be some kind of local news. And then another 15-minute slot, there'd be kids singing. At 7 o'clock, it was all over. It was done. That was the total programming.
All of a sudden, Lowell Thomas came along.
One of the big thrills I got out of this whole building was seeing Lowell Thomas for the first time walk through those doors in the company of Frank Smith. Now that's got to take us.
No, we wouldn't be where we are today if it hadn't been for what they did back then.
Hello, everybody. This is Lowell Thomas with another in my series about people.
My name is John Ainsley, and I'm the Director of Archives and Special Collections at Marist College. So Will Thomas really became famous when he made T. Lawrence famous as Lawrence of Arabia back in the 1918, 1919. So Thomas became famous as a lecturer or doing travelogue shows. So it was like a multimedia extravaganza.
There wasn't a lot of television, there was a lot of radio. And people went to the movies and they saw a newsreel along with the feature. And the newsreel was always about the war, and Lowell Thomas was the narrator.
He's probably best known for his work in radio. He started in 1930, and his radio show, he stopped it in 1976.
But in those days, radio was so important with respect to news.
He was interesting because he really set the modern news format.
But Lowell Thomas was a remarkable man. I was privileged to be a producer for him for 5 or 6 assignments, but he used to say W instead of W. It came out and people would say, well, why don't you fix that? You want me to correct the most famous radio man in the world? It's W. It's going to stay W.
and so long until tomorrow.
Well, Thomas was great at making money, but he was also very, very good at spending money. So he realized he needed a financial advisor, and he was introduced to Frank Smith. Frank Smith heard about WROW and the radio station up in Albany, and he decided to pursue it.
Lowell Thomas, the great newsman, had an opportunity to buy a bankrupt station.
The station was founded in 1947 by Hudson Valley Broadcasting, run by Harry Goldman. It included WROW-TV Channel 41, but the FCC didn't approve its TV license until 6 years later. On October 14, 1953, WROW Channel 41 went on the air.
At the time they bought Hudson Valley Broadcasting, it was a UHF station, so it had very weak signal.
And he knew very well that sooner or later we were going to be able to be VHS as well.
So the idea was that they would apply to the FCC and go for a VHF station, so then they could become a CBS affiliate and really be a powerhouse, at least in the Albany area.
He hired an engineering firm in Washington, and they discovered that if you drew 3 circles in different directions from Providence area and then from Rochester, that there was a small piece of real estate at the bottom of Sacandaga Lake, and who would expect that a VHF could drop in there? Except Tom Murphy and Lowell Thomas knew.
He was the godfather of Capital Cities, so he lent his name to Capital Cities. He was the major shareholder in Capital Cities from the time they bought Hudson Valley Broadcasting until his death.
But that was what was called a crapshoot. That crapshoot brought to Albany a man named Thomas Murphy.
Tom Murphy and his old Pontiac used to park right about here. That was exclusively Tom.
That was before he got the T-Bird, right? After
Yeah.
he started making money?
That was when we were still breaking Tom in, right? And look at what he became. Whatever happened to Tom Murphy?
Thomas Murphy, who was a remarkable individual who went on to be one of the most highly regarded men in the business.
When they were first looking at the station, Thomas asked, well, what are you going to buy it for? Like, 10 cents on the dollar, and Frank Smith said, no, we want to pay full price. We want to be fair. We want both sides to walk away from the table happy.
While WROW was broadcasting out of Albany, its home was miles away in rural Rensselaer County.
In North Greenbush, there was a home for retired nuns.
The building belonged to St. Joseph Church. Whether it was a church building or not, I don't know. But it led into, I think, that the nuns could take over this building.
It's a big, white, old building that Mr. Murphy had painted only one side that you could see, because we saved money all the time.
There's not much on Glenmore Road where it was, so the property was probably fairly inexpensive, but it's high up, and they could have a radio tower there.
This was the old driveway here.
Yeah.
It's still got as many potholes as it did then.
You just couldn't fix this darn thing. It's a wonder we got to work the way we did.
My name's Ted Zabrowski. Right after I got out of the Navy and 6 months in television school, I worked at Channel 10 from 1956 to 1967. The road was a dirt farm road, I would say maybe a half a mile long. In the winter, the wind would blow something awful. And when it snowed, it would drift. When I saw the building, I didn't think I was in the proper place, to be honest with you.
My name is Stan Roman, and I worked at WTEN from 1958 till 1983. The nunnery looked like a castle to me because I hadn't really gotten any real job. The receptionist would get a call, and you know how she would page him? Dan, you got a call.
Broke down a lot of walls and built a small studio, which was a former chapel, and it had the seats in it and the pews. And we moved all those out for television. So it was a famous picture that lived through the years of Stan Roman operating a camera in the studio, and he had an umbrella over his head because the roof was leaking.
I had to get this one shot, and the only way I could do it was this position. And it rained. So I says, I'll take care of this. And I got an umbrella and I put it out there, and we salvaged the show.
After 3 years, the FCC finally granted WROW a VHF channel, allowing most of the capital region to watch Channel 41 without an antenna. There was one more important question.
Tom said, what do you think we ought to call it? And I said, come on, Tom. TEN.
WTEN.
Channel 10.
Channel 10. Channel 10.
TV 10.
TV 10.
TV 10.
That was it. We chose TEN. 10 sounded pretty good to me.
Welcome back. You know, in those first few years of business, the owners of Cap Cities checked off a lot of boxes.
Going from UHF to VHF, going from WROW to WTEN, and going from Channel 41 to Channel 10.
That's when the real work had to begin, what to put on the air.
I was all of a sudden running the programming department with a man named Gig Pogan. I looked the schedule over on WRGB. They were adult and soap operas all afternoon, and I said, we got to go for kids. And then all of a sudden, we found Mr. Thaddeus Konopka. Thaddeus Konopka was a ventriloquist, a radio man, and we called him and we hired him. His name, of course, was Ted Knight.
My name is Matthew Malley, and I am president of the Plymouth Historical Society.
Ted Knight grew up in Terryville, part of the town of Plymouth in Connecticut.
He was born on 18 Allen Street, which was a Polish enclave within town.
After serving in World War II, he studied acting and landed a job in Providence, Rhode Island, before his career took off in Albany.
Ted Knight was very, very, very valuable to us. And he didn't know how valuable he was. We didn't pay him very much money, but he managed to allow us not to hire many other talents, because he would be on the air from 3 o'clock to maybe 9 o'clock.
He would come in with his makeup and everything on and his dialect, and he would be Windy Knight, and he would introduce the Gene Autry or the Roy Rogers movie for the day.
We developed a show called Uncle Ted was a policeman, and Uncle Ted had puppets, Sir Bernard and Bernard. And Ted would come in about 10:30 in the morning, and he'd look and, you mean a man of my talent has got to read stuff like this? And the group would, from the chorus would say, read it, Ted, read it. He says, okay.
My dear wife, during one of the station breaks, she went out personally and she handed them a tray. She said, this is for you. And so Ted Knight came back on live and he says, I have a surprise for everybody. Gene Zabrowski made Italian cookies for me. And then he says, Zabrowski, Italian cookies, you know, and that was a big laugh.
Finally, after about 2 or 3 years, doing all of the stuff that we put him through, he said to me, I got to have more money. Talk to Tom, he's going to be very, very considerate. And I can remember he left, in about a half hour he was back. And he walks into the studio and he's got a big smile on his face. And Tom said, if I gave you a $50 raise, it would destroy your career, because you'd stay here another few years. You've got to leave, and you've got to go to Hollywood.
Ted Knight appeared in dozens of commercials and TV shows over the next 15 years.
One day, I get a call, and he said, you're going to love this. I got a role on a new show, Mary Tyler Moore.
His role as anchorman Ted Baxter earned him fame, fortune, and 2 Emmy Awards, but he never forgot where it all began.
Every year did a telethon for cerebral palsy. I called his agent and said, what do you think? He called me back and he says, yeah, Teddy will do it. I said, terrific. And he came in, he was a real success, and he wanted to kill time the next day. And I told him, I'll take him to my Polish club. While we were there, he said, speak Polish? I said, yes. He says, you know, can I call my mother in California and you talk to her in Polish for a little while? I said, sure. So he did, and I did, and she and I had fun. Well, the next year, I wanted Ted to come back, and the agent said, no, you can't. I was going to call Ted, but his mother answered the phone, and I told her the story, and she says, no, Tadeusz will be there. And I just left it at that. 2 days later, I got a call from his agent and said, what did you do? Teddy will be there, but what did you do? I said, I just went to a higher authority.
And in the town where he grew up, Ted Knight's legacy lives on, with a bridge named after him and his star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame included in the town mural.
He didn't want people to think that who he was on Mary Tyler Moore was who he was in life.
And he continued to have relationships with the people he met and knew from Albany.
My children loved him. They called him Uncle Ted. I have pictures of Ted with my daughter standing up to his waist.
In the early days of television, everything was live, the programs and most of the commercials. And sometimes, as was the case with Bob Gordon, both would happen at the same time.
He had to get into attendance costume as a gasoline, at the gasoline pump, and he'd go out and he'd be all dressed up as an Atlantic weatherman, and the camera would come on and say, Atlantic keeps your car on the go for business or pleasure in any kind of weather. Atlantic keeps your car on the go.
We did Romper Room live in the morning. The bees, every now and then one would land on Miss Diane's set in front of her, and she'd quick go to a commercial so that we could get the bee out of there because she was very disturbed about that.
Many of us were not trained, but we had a chance, and management that said, go ahead, do your best thing, just don't embarrass us.
They were all willing to share their knowledge, but they also would get very upset when you goofed, because it was for the world to look at, if you know what I'm saying. You know, there was no take twos or take threes, everything would happen.
All the time we were there, we would say, hey, we need a new station. We need a new station. We need a new station. Jon Stewart, George Layton, Ralph Vardigan.
I don't remember any bad people.
They were all part of a machine and all partners. We had very little politics.
But politics was a big part of Sam Stratton.
And Sam Stratton, the mayor, was the newsman. And that was fun too, because Sam was so good.
To supplement his salary as mayor of Schenectady, Sam Stratton appeared as an anchorman at WROW.
Sam sat at one desk called the Albany desk. 10 feet to the right was the Schenectady desk. And 10 feet to this side was the Washington desk. And the camera, the second camera, would take right over here.
Stratton also played a cowboy and was known as Sagebrush Sam. In 1958, Stratton began a long and distinguished career in Congress. His name adorns both the Air National Guard base in Scotia and the Veterans Hospital in Albany.
George Layton was the old skipper, put on his beard and his pea jacket and sailor hat, and he would come on and he was introducing the Popeye cartoons.
George had this luscious broadcasting voice. It was so rich and filled with multiple colors, you know.
Turning our attention to weather once again.
Ralph Vardigan, Commander Ralph, came in and did the good ship news.
There was a kind of special chemistry, I think, between me and Ralph. He was one of the most generous people I have ever worked with, and I mean that. He shared what he knew. He was always a gentleman. He was a lovely, lovely, decent human being, and it was a joy to work with him. I was very, very lucky. I get all verklempt about Ralph.
Jon Stewart was what you would call a quick study. John would put a script in front of him. He'd read it over maybe twice. He'd put the script down, one take, and he was good. Next day, if you asked him about what the commercial was about, he couldn't remember it worth a darn.
I just think everybody enjoyed what they were doing, and they individually wanted to be successful.
In order to be successful, everyone knew they had to leave the nunnery.
It was automatic. We had to do, all the time we were there, we would say, hey, we need a new station.
And we had talked about it for 2 and 3 years ahead of time. Hey, we're going to get a new building. Where's it going to be?
And that new station would be located at 341 Northern Boulevard. Groundbreaking started in the early 1960s. It opened up in 1966.
Large and so luxurious.
Well, it was a dream.
The amazing thing was we could actually pull a car, set up 3 cars in the studio. In the old building, we were lucky if we could get a car in the driveway.
One of the things that we noticed was that the roof was not soundproof, and when it rained hard, you had to apologize to the audience for the rain. And Steve is still doing that now on the weather. He says, "Up, you hear the rain up there?"
When we moved to the new building, I went back to the nunnery and I saw the doors that they were always covered with plywood. And I was always wondering what was behind there. And so I ripped off the plywood, and lo and behold, there were two beautiful stained glass doors. Took them to our news studio. One of the technicians bumped them, fell, went in 100 pieces.
So whatever happened to them?
One is there, and the other one is there.
The same year Channel 10 moved into its new building, the nunnery caught fire and burned to the ground.
Today at the site, the home of the 42nd Infantry Division at the Glenmore Road Armory, still serving the community after all these years.
About the same time WTEN moved to its Northern Boulevard home, Cap Cities was really taking flight.
Company bought out several TV stations and newspapers before making its biggest purchase, the ABC network, in 1985.
In fact, 2 books were written about the beginnings of WTEN and Cap Cities.
Limping on Water by Phil Buth, who after working in Albany became president of Good Morning America and ABC Late Night.
And Capital Cities, the early days, how the minnow came to swallow the whale, by former WTEN news director Walt Hauver.
With a new building and a growing company, WTEN began to make waves in the market and stake its claim as a news leader.
For a close look at our departments, let's begin with our newsroom. WTEN has a talented staff of news people.
That was the beginning of a phone conversation which, in all probability, saved a family, a personality, perhaps even a life.
The focal point for a proposed riverfront project involving Albany and Rensselaer. Thousands flock to its shores every summer, but not right around the Capital District. Why? Because the water is a little objectionable.
Violence was missing today, and everyone seemed willing to wait until Friday to find out what the court says before there's any more confrontation.
After DeBona's testimony alluding to a confession made by Smith, there was a lunch recess. When defense attorney William Kunstler emerged, he told reporters that Smith never made such a confession.
The dissatisfaction, the disapproval, and what they call the frustration will be felt here Sunday when a massive rally is held right in front of this center.
So although prices and inflation are at an all-time high, it appears people are also buying at an all-time high. The only problem is they're paying more for less.
She admits telling an officer, "You'll pay for this," whereupon she claims she was hit in the eye. Police maintain that she suffered that injury in a fall.
If the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat is not enough of an incentive to spur some intense outhouse race competition, the prizes being awarded certainly are. After all, what outhouse racer worth his salt wouldn't want to take home this beauty for his or her mantelpiece?
The overriding attitude in the newsroom was, we're going to beat the pants off the competition. Our new news, it was the highest rating, or any show in that time slot, east of the Mississippi.
My name is Marcy Elliott, and I was the main co-anchor with Dick Wood from 1981 until 1989. Everybody watched local news. I mean, this was the source. You know, we didn't have cable networks when I was there.
Hi, I'm Elisa Streeter, and I started at News 10 in the late 1980s and was there for 32 great years. We were taught that our job was mostly to inform. It was a public service. We were there to inform and maybe educate.
Ralph Ionati, TV 10 Action News.
When I started here, it was 1976. I came over from radio. I worked in Albany radio. You report the facts and try to get the information correct at all cost, really.
Wonderful reporters. I mean, seasoned reporters.
There was extraordinary talent and depth of experience that had been amassed in the newsroom.
I mean, John McLaughlin and Ralph Ionati and Doug Myers, Bob Lawson. I mean, these guys were the best of the best.
These big monsters only get about 12 or 13 miles to the gallon, but if you can save $1,000 off the list price, that means that you're getting 12,000 free miles of driving.
Hyde Park, the home of FDR, was given to the government as a National Historic Site in 1946.
The need, then, for more volunteers on local volunteer ambulance squads is critical.
Maybe you think county welfare departments are cold, impersonal bureaucracies. Well, at times they may be that, but there's also the other side of the story, as Albany County is showing.
You'd call the police every day. You'd check with the coroner's office.
For news, they love getting out there. I remember Ralph Iannotti coming into the newsroom every single morning faithfully, and he had a list of people he called. Local DA, the governor's office, people in the legislature, day in and day out, and he was always looking for a tip.
I always wanted to be first when I covered stories because that was my bag. But you have to be so careful because there's so much information. You want to be first, but you also want to be factual. You want to have the facts straight.
I loved when I first came to Channel 10 because we were such a team.
Thank you, Lisa.
Good evening. I'm Elisa Streeter.
Our own Elisa Streeter is in the thick of things at Colony Center. Elisa?
The photographer and I would get together every morning. We would discuss how our story was going to look, where the images would fit in, how they would match the words.
And what made my job easier really were the people I worked with. I worked with some talented people here in Albany, the camera people, and the producers, the writers, the behind-the-scenes people.
They had a lust for news. They loved getting out there.
When I first started, I covered everything because I was a street reporter. So you do everything.
I was a reporter, a street reporter for all of my career, basically.
So you might be doing politics. You certainly were going to be doing crime.
Albany, being a capital city, was also a very political town. It still is and will probably always be, just like Washington, D.C.
Then I did my share of features. And even as I went along, over the years, I did more and more features.
As soon as you take off, you're going to swing up into a seated position.
Okay, it takes less than a minute to get me strapped in and off.
And away you go.
We had such a great time going to Ireland. We were with a group, though, from the Capital Region, so it was a really fun way to sort of get to know the Capital Region and their ties to Ireland.
Now, you would think the hard part would be just getting to the top of the castle, but wait till you have to kiss the Blarney Stone.
We were on our way over to Moscow, and we were there for 10 days. It was a cultural exchange with our people coming over doing Rag Dolly at the Moscow Musical Theater for Children.
No other Broadway show can say it traveled the farthest it possibly could for an out-of-town audition.
We were in the middle of Red Square. We were doing some kind of a shoot, and somebody walked by and said, "Hey, Marcy." They were from the Capital District. I mean, we're in Moscow in the dead of winter.
It was a real privilege. I mean, think about what people do. They turn on a television, they take a positive action, and they allow you to come into their living room. What an invitation. What a privilege. And I think we all felt that way.
People used to say to me, "Well, how did you survive so long in television? You've done it so many years." The guys I worked with, they were tremendous bunch of guys, and the women too, but they know their stuff, and they're very, very professional.
This half hour, our Eyewitness News team.
It was great for me that I kind of grew up on News 10. They saw me basically fall in love, get married, and have 3 children, and see those children grow up.
Hi, I'm Elisa Streeter. What do you do when you feel like you're
I think that they can relate to you when they see you out in the field pregnant, when they see you out in the field in so many different ways, not to mention your hairstyles, because that was a big deal, and I had about 40 of them over my years there.
It was truly a family. I mean, these people, I can't explain it. We were this massive team that had such affinity for each other.
One of the people I laughed with the most, of course, and the one who I worked with, I loved working with all those years, with Steve Caprizzo.
Am I on camera?
I mean, I was there right from the beginning with him, and he just was so important to me in working with him. And one of the things that we did was laugh.
Give Pumpkin a second chance at a home. Right, Pumpkin?
still young, right?
Oh.
Jim, coming your way.
The way the news looks has changed a lot over the last 70 years, and nowhere is that more evident than in our weather center. And Chief Meteorologist Steve Caprizzo, you have seen a lot of changes because you've been here almost half of News 10's 70 years.
I know, it's amazing, Lydia. You know, time goes by like that, number one.
I remember when I first got into TV in 1983, it was a big deal to do a 2-day forecast. Wow. That was it. And then when it went to a 3-day forecast, like in the 80s, it was like, wow, we can forecast 3 days into the future. When I came here in 1989, we went to a 5-day forecast, and now, of course, a 7 and 10-day. The computer models that we use to forecast have changed tremendously.
All of the technology in the Weather Center has changed so much, and we'll get to that in a minute. But first, I want to go way back to the beginning for you. You were always interested in nature and weather. Have you always wanted to be a meteorologist?
You know, the answer to that is absolutely yes. I was probably 8 or 9 years old, and I remember there was a blizzard. I grew up outside of Boston. There was this huge snowstorm. And I remember I used to always watch the weather on TV, and they were all wrong. And I go, why were they wrong? And that started my fascination with weather. Why did things happen? Why did we get so much snow? And to this day, it's still kind of my hobby. And you know me, even when I'm not working, I love watching the weather. In fact, I enjoy it more when I'm not working because I don't have to forecast it.
These symbols that you see here indicating showers and thunderstorms, 2 cold fronts bringing cooler, drier Canadian air sweeping southeastward out of Canada, mostly cloudy skies around the Capital District. There are some scattered showers about, 62 in Albany, 80 degrees in Schenectady.
But things have changed. Let's get back to, you used to throw little suns up on a map.
When I started in television, you're right, I had a big wall, and I drew with a magic marker, and I would scallop the clouds. I'd put a low and a high on it, and I would spend like an hour making this big map, and I wrote my forecast on the wall by hand. And that's how it started out in television, or like you said, they had a magnetic wall. I wish I did, because at the end of the day, I had to put a big glove on and a bucket and wash it all. Right, I had this sponge. It took me 20 minutes to wash it off. But you look at the early days in TV with the magnets and drawing with magic markers to what we have today with the unbelievable, sophisticated graphics. It helps us forecast, but what it does most, it helps explain the weather. Doppler radar started in 1990. It was this new technology, and we were kind of like low on the priority list, so I don't think we got ours till 96 or 97. But the thing was, when we got it, we had it before the Mechanicville tornado. And there's no doubt having that radar here saved lives.
Describe to me the day of the Mechanicville tornado. What was happening here in the station?
Yeah. We were actually doing a telethon for the Children's Miracle Network, and I was one of the hosts, and I knew that day there was going to be bad thunderstorms. And I remember this one particular storm that was coming out of Montgomery County. It started to rotate tremendously, and that's when we knew there was a tornado, not a small tornado, a significant, like a Midwestern tornado. You work all year for a telethon, and they're so important. I said, you have to stop the telethon.
It is wicked, it's scary.
Well, it twisted the house around. My wife and my son, we were in the door frame when the house was shaking.
Fortunately, nobody died. 65 or 70 injuries. It was like a war zone. It was like a bomb went off.
That Mechanicville tornado, one of those moments you'll never forget. Yeah. The same with Tropical Storm Irene.
I was sitting down with my news director, Dave Ciliberti, and I remember saying to him the night before, I go, Dave, I'm scared. People will die around here from this because of the flooding.
The water has been so bad that we're unable to get in there now, and we're only able to talk to the fire chief by radio.
Now, this home is just one of the hundreds of homes in Prattsville that suffered such damage like this.
These are household appliances. I mean, it's a mountain, higher than the water ever was. That will be a storm that I'll never forget because of the sheer destruction to every river, every bridge.
One of the reasons people watch you a lot, especially in the winter, snowstorms and kids. Now that they don't have to wait for their school to scroll along the bottom.
You remember those days? Yeah.
That's an improvement there. They can go online. The school tells them if it's closed or not.
I remember when the anchor would sit there, the whole morning newscast was the anchor reading the school cancellations.
Everybody watches to see who's going to get how much snow and when. What are the worst ones you remember?
Obviously, the benchmark for here and for me is the blizzard of '93. It was like March 14th, 15th. When it hit here, it was ferocious. We were snowed in here at the station. There was a state of emergency. I remember it started on a Saturday. We got just about, I think, 27 inches here at the station. Second biggest storm of all time. The other one that I always remember, and it's for two reasons, and we were just talking about this a little while ago, the Valentine's Day blizzard in 2007.
Everybody's got their date night plans. They want to go out to eat, be romantic.
I was outside shoveling, clearing, trying to get late at night, trying to get ready to go home. And I don't know if I took my glove off or what. I didn't notice it. And I'm sitting in here in the weather office, and I go, where's my wedding band? I was like, I looked around the building, I tried to trace where I was. Next day we come back, Lisa and I, with a metal detector. And we're going through the parking lot looking, nothing. Outside the garage door, you remember they used to pile the snow? There'd be like, there was like a 10-foot pile of snow there.
Like what you'd see in like a mall shopping.
Yes, yes, exactly. So I go, jokingly, I go, it has to be somewhere in that pile. And all that's left of that pile of snow is about the size of a pillow. And I'm looking down. Something just caught my eye with the reflection. It was my ring. It was in that pile of snow.
For 2 months.
For 2 months. And we were going to get another one to replace it. And there it was. And here it is today. You know what I love about my job the most?
What?
Being a meteorologist, I've lived out a childhood dream. It's helped me help pets, because if I wasn't doing what I was doing, there would have never been a pet connection. So weather is part of my life because it's enabled me to help the lives of pets. They kind of go hand in hand now, you know, I'm very lucky.
Say the words WTEN News, and odds are someone will mention legendary anchor Dick Wood.
He's a man who loved the Capital Region and sharing a good story. We couldn't do this special without spending some time with our old friend.
Hello, I'm Dick Wood.
Anybody that knew him would tell you that he was just a great storyteller and loved telling them.
True newsman from the get-go.
Doug Myers reports tonight that the toxic...
Well, he had that beautiful, sonorous voice. And he had a good sense of humor, a wonderful sense of humor.
Whatever comes to mind, it just...
And that voice. He was right out of the 60s and 70s kind of news era where they had the big booming voice, you know. He really played that part perfectly.
There's no other continuing event that affects more people than the weather.
From the cool name to the sharp look and a voice that could make the storm clouds jealous, Dick Wood was one of the most respected journalists in Capital Region history.
This is Marcy and Dick.
His wife, Chris, has a room filled with mementos and memories from every chapter of that rich 91-year life. When he was young, Dick caught the news bug when he caught an actual bug while serving in the Army.
His first job was in when he was in the service, and he got pneumonia, and while he was rehabbing, he opened a radio station there in the hospital that had been defunct and nobody was using it.
After the service, Dick took a job in radio in Rhode Island. That led to a spot anchoring the evening news in Providence for 10 years. Then in 1973, WTEN in Albany made him an offer he couldn't refuse.
The light rain we had today didn't put much of a dent in our drought-like conditions.
The moment Dick hit the airwaves here, people took notice.
He just looked classier, didn't he? Just had something that was so classy. And boy, did he wear a suit great. He had suits and ties. My God, he dressed to the nines.
And when you walked in the newsroom, he would always say hi to everybody. And he really set the tone for the newsroom.
He'd call all the police agencies to check to see if there were any news stories coming out of those agencies. And he would always open his conversation with, any goodies for Woody? And he'd get stories with that.
That relentless digging led to great stories, higher ratings, and the awards soon followed.
Consummate newsman. Yeah. He was always always looking for the story. He worked very closely with the state police and got many awards from them, which was really, really nice.
Big TV stations in bigger markets tried to steal him away, but he wouldn't leave us for any amount of money or fame.
He was not a city person. He wanted a camp. He wanted to be walking in the woods, and he liked that small community feeling.
That does it for this edition of Eyewitness News tonight. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again tomorrow.
After he retired from TV news, Dick Wood hosted a jazz show on local radio.
This is Jazz Tracks. You better believe it. Oh, yeah, this is Dick Wood with the show.
And he was the voice of several popular TV commercials. Then in the fall of 2020, right in the middle of that COVID pandemic, Dick celebrated his 90th birthday with a very special parade in his honor.
I think it's unbelievable. I never expected it. I didn't know she did this for me. That's my wife, Chris, I'm talking about. What a jewel. This is Dick Wood, and I had a lovely birthday, and God bless you all for being so thoughtful.
Here is Carol Channing. He hosted Dave Brubeck and Dizzy Gillespie.
Dick Wood loved people, from the celebrities he met to the guy at the corner coffee shop. Each encounter coming with a story he was dying to share.
And told stories over and over and over again. And each time I'd say, Dick, I've heard this before, and he'd continue to tell me again. So I loved him. And he drove me crazy with that. But I loved him and what I would give for another story from Dick Wood. That's going to make me cry.
Nobody could relate more to Dick's loquacious linguistics than the love of his life, his wife, Chris.
He'd wake up chirpy and happy, and it'd be like, Dick, please quiet down. Let me get coffee. And it is quiet here. But I talk to him every day. I see him, I hear him.
Still feel like he's there and you can talk to him?
Oh, I do. I do. He had this thing about when he got out of bed, he had to make the bed. So every morning when I make the bed, it's like, I'm making the bed, Dickie. We just talk every day.
I got a great wife who sticks with me through the crazy hours and the unpredictability of the industry. But I weathered that because she's there and because you're out there. Your outgoing of love is kind of like Sinatra used to refer to as been a love-in. And it's been an 18-year love-in for me. I've met some marvelous people. I've had a good one.
For 33 years, Cap has been hosting Pet Connection. But he wasn't the first WTEN on-air personality to help pets. Several years earlier, there was Marcy Elliott's Because We Care.
Katie, a 9-month-old stray, tried to protect herself from the cold by climbing into a car engine. She got caught in the fan belt, was thrown out, and landed under the car.
I've always been passionate about the fact that animals are dying because people are irresponsible. And I guess, I don't know who I was talking with, but we put 2 and 2 together and said, let's do a series. And so every single week, we did a educational segment.
Once December arrives, wild birds, for the most part, depend on humans for food. Mike Riley of Tina Maria's Garden Center in Albany says it's important not to cut corners when you buy birdseed.
I was coordinating with 12 shelters through 3 states. And we would have somebody every week, one of those shelters would appear along with one of the pieces.
Welcome to Whiskers, a cageless haven for abandoned and abused cats on display for potential owners.
We'll walk them through and we'll point out everyone, just like they're looking for a car. We're going to tell them what model we have.
Late Monday afternoon, we got a call about a skunk that had been hit by a car 2 days earlier.
It must have been below zero one day, and we were driving through, I think, Troy, and I saw a skunk that had been dying in the middle of, on the side of the road. We had a wildlife rehab person. I don't know if we got that skunk to her in time, but we did a whole thing on when you see animals on the side of the road that are injured, what do? People would make fun of these segments. Oh, it's an animal. And now look. So I'm glad I stuck to my guns and we helped save a whole bunch of lives. I'm so glad to see that Steve is continuing the animal thing, because there has to be somebody out there speaking on their behalf
Rick's been at WTEN for 34 years, but there are 2 other employees who've been here even longer.
Engineer Paul LaPierre started at the station in 1982. 41 years later, he's still making people here smile.
And news photographer Rick Easton began working at WTEN in 1987. 36 years later, he's still turning out award-winning stories. Rick learned from one of the best, Marty Miller.
For more than 40 years, if it happened in the Capital Region, Marty was there. It's only fitting that Rick teamed up with our good friend Anya Tucker to tell his story.
His pictures tell the story of the Capital Region's biggest stories.
A tractor from a tractor trailer upside down.
Forget the fluff.
Fire destroys Nassau Lake Inn.
Photographer Marty Miller only ever wanted to capture breaking news, hard-hitting and raw.
It was in my blood. It was more in my blood even than getting the money for it.
Growing up in Albany, he snapped photos for the school paper. His sister says if you spotted Marty anywhere, he was there with a camera.
If he heard the fire sirens going off, I mean, he hopped in the car and was right out there.
Starting in the 1960s, he worked as a photographer for area newspapers and WTEN. That was back when TV news stories were on film, as in Film at 11.
And you used to have to come back to the station and put it in a bath, process it. And then it had to come out of the bath and we had to dry it. I can remember distinctly having Marty Miller hang film out on the tree limbs in the front of the building to get it dry enough to use for the 6 o'clock.
Through the years, he moved on to video and digital cameras, often grabbing exclusive shots, like during this shootout on I-90 back in 2009.
Contact team has made contact with the suspect.
Perhaps it was his experience as a volunteer firefighter that gave him an extra sense of urgency.
Sometimes we would joke like, you got there before everyone else did, police and fire crews.
Sometimes it wasn't until the next day when they got there.
So he came into the newsroom and said, I've got a great story, you're coming with me, come on. So we jumped in the car and off we went, 90 miles an hour. It probably wasn't that fast, but it seemed it. And about 15 minutes into the trip, he did this wacky U-turn in the middle of the road and headed back. And I said, what are you doing? Where are we going? He said, I forgot the camera. We got back to the station, he put the camera in the trunk, we headed out again, and he drove so fast that we got to the stream and the kid and the rescue just as it was happening and didn't miss the story.
The first love of his life has always been family and his wife, Kathy, who was his partner in life and in work. Kathy passed away in August. In 2011, Marty retired from News 10, but his body of work is an archive of the people and places of the Capital Region and his town of East Greenbush. He was honored during a special ceremony by dignitaries, family, and friends.
Thank you for what you're doing here for me today, and I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
At 82, he admits he has slowed down a bit.
Yeah, so this is, wow, so this is new. This is your new
so
stuff.
is that.
But the man they call the legend is still out there, chasing down stories.
Just to go out and tell the rest of the world about the things that are going on. And if the world don't know what goes on, everything falls apart.
West again, I gotta go, there's a fire.
Marty Miller's such an inspiration for countless people who worked with him. We hope you enjoyed this look back at the people and history of WTEN as we celebrate its 70th anniversary.
And before we go, we want to do a special thank you to Photo Video Productions in Schenectady for dubbing over hours of our old video from our archives. Also, the Plymouth, Connecticut Historical Society and Marist College Archives and Special Collections for access to its Lowell Thomas artifacts. Thanks for watching. Here's to another 70 years.